Men den første taler i dag, det er Torulf Palm, som er professor ved Umeå Universitet. Og bare sådan til lidt sammenligning, så er Umeå Universitet det største institution for matematikdidaktik i Norden. Og jeg er 25 matematikdidaktikere hos jer. Ja, jeg tror på universitetsniveau i Danmark, så kan vi måske med faste stillinger mønstre 10 eller noget i den stil. Ikke? Så det er jo lidt, det giver sammenligningsgrundlag her. Og Torulf har lavet rigtig meget om bedømmelse og evaluering, og har arbejdet med, også med de danske kompetencebeskrivelser i sit arbejde, og er bekendt med det. Og du har haft et tæt samarbejde også med Mogens Nis over en årrække. Så det glæder vi os rigtig meget til at høre om, Torulf. Og Torulf har debatteret lidt med mig, om han skal tale på svensk eller engelsk, og vi er blevet enige om, at Torulf taler på engelsk i dag. Men I er velkommen til at stille spørgsmål på dansk, når vi når så langt. Eller svensk. Eller engelsk. Så, værsgo, Torulf.
So there. Now I'm ready, I think. Is the volume at the good work? So okay, so I'm going to talk about formative assessment, and in a few minutes I will ask you what you think about formative assessment and what you know, but we'll come back to that then. And how assessment may enhance our students' learning. This is who I am. I used to be a mathematics and physics teacher a long time ago. And then I moved up to university and I worked for national tests for upper secondary school in mathematics. At the same time I went to PhD studies, and nowadays most of the things I do is research. About 75 or 80% of my time I do research in teaching and learning in mathematics mostly, but nowadays not only in mathematics but also in some other subjects. I teach teacher education at the same time, and I also work with teachers in schools in professional development programs. I will come back to that a little later also, because we tend to work with teachers more than only 2 teachers or 4 teachers and so on. So when I started working with formative assessment some 10 years ago, I developed some courses in formative assessment in the university. Back in those days, our teacher education students didn't get much. We didn't have any courses in assessment at all, I would say, but not in formative assessment anyway. But I developed some courses, and at our university now, all teacher education students, whether they are in preschool or in the lower grades or upper secondary school or whoever, they take courses have to take courses in both formative assessment and summative assessments. So together they have some 1.5 months in assessment issues. So this is how it looks in Umeå at the moment. Except there is a meter of snow or something on top of that. So it's located at the northeast coast, about 700 kilometers north of Stockholm. We're, for Swedish measures, mid-sized city, 123,000. And as you see, we have about 32,000 students and 123,000 citizens, which means that the average age is quite low because of all the students. Not all of these students live in Umeå all the time. They are distant students, but most of them, of course, do that. So there are industries and factories, but it's not much of that. It's more like a university city. So I will tell you a little bit more of the research that we do at the university and my department. But first, this is the aim of this hour. And that is that you will be able to confirm, because you know stuff already, but also possibly complement your insights about formative assessment. And I thought about this aim. It says you will be. It doesn't say I will say something about, because it's I mean, it's you who complement your insights. It's you that confirm. It's not me doing that. So hopefully you will have some more insights and confirm what you already know about what is formative assessment, what is it not, and that's a big issue in Sweden at the moment. What is it not? So I will describe some different aspects of formative assessment, FA. Also give some examples of how it can be carried out in the classroom, some techniques that we as teachers can use practically. And also I will discuss why we would want to carry it out. I mean, we do not want to do stuff that we don't have a good argument for that we should do it. So I will show some research, but also some experiences from teachers and students. There could be there could be arguments for why we do what we do in the classroom. And research could be one of these arguments, but also what are the experiences, my own experiences, my colleagues' experiences, students' experiences. That's also valuable when I decide what I want to do in a classroom. And I think you agree, it's really important that what we do, we really have arguments for why we do it the way we do. We just don't do it. We say, I want to do it this way because. And I think that's important for several reasons. I don't know how it's in Denmark now, but in Sweden there is more and more from students and parents who have opinions about how teaching should be done. And also principles, okay? You're not teaching any good. You should do it in this way instead. And I think if you come to a doctor in a hospital and say, you shouldn't do that, you should do this instead, then I would suspect that the doctor would have good arguments for why you should operate in this way and not the other way. And I think it's important that we have the same argument. Not the same, but we also have strong arguments. It shouldn't be possible for a parent who's not a teacher to come in and say that's not a good way of doing it. We should be able to say, yes, it is, because this and this and this and that. So it's important for our profession, our professional identity. So what is it? What is it not? How could we do it? Why would we want to do it? And the talk is for all of us. There will probably be some of you who thinks that, yes, I'm quite a good teacher. I know a lot of stuff. I know very much about formative assessment. And there will be some of you who have not the same confidence. And possibly you say, I'm not that into formative assessment. I don't know very much at the moment. So there will be a difference between you. But I think that we can all learn anyway from talking about these issues. And if you go to those who are good in sports, world leading, for example, there are just some quotes for some of those. I have so much to develop. I can improve everything. I feel fine now. I continue to develop. Even those who are best in the world, they know that they can improve even further. I would say it's the same for us. So even if we are, and probably most of us are very good teachers, we could still improve. So and when I go to a conference, for example, and I could go to conferences, I can go to lectures about formative assessment. Since I do this 100% of the time, and I've done this for many years, I have come to collect some knowledge. But it doesn't mean that I can't learn from others anyway. Sometimes it's just a small thing, but that could be very valuable to me. So just look for the things you don't know. So if we want to develop in our profession, what might we focus on? Because as they say, we can't improve everything all the time. So we have to choose sometimes. So the idea is that maybe some aspects of formative assessment might be useful in our teaching. But now we come to the assessment part. And here is where I'm going to assess you. But it's not that dangerous. I would like you to help me now by going into that link on your computers or your mobile telephones. It works for both. And it's anonymous, so you don't have to feel any fear. But there's a question there I would like you to answer. And when you write the address here, it's important, of course, if you have capital letters or not. When you come in there, you will see a question, and it's a multiple choice question. So you just tick into one of the boxes, the one that you feel the most for. And then you have to click on next. And then you will see the same question again. Do not tick into another box, because it's a question you will do later on. So just tick in one of the boxes in the first question, part 1. Go next, and then submit. But you need to go to next first. And please ask me or one of your colleagues if you have difficulties. And your names will not appear, so it's just to see how different opinions we might have from the beginning about what we're talking about. If you're having trouble to get into the link, you can use use your partner's link, and you can send it twice. Your partner, your colleague sitting next to you. So this is how it looks when you have arrived at the link. And at the moment I have 15 answers right up at the top.
Can't you go back to the address, because it disappeared?
Yeah, you want the address again? I can do that. Absolutely. So about half of you have succeeded in ticking a box.
Ja. Skal man sende, eller skal man ikke gøre det? Skal man stoppe der, eller skal man sende den afsted?
Send, but not tick a box, but send.
Okay,
if you don't,
uden at
you need to press send, otherwise I will not see the answer. Right. Now we'll take a look at this. Now many of you have ticked the box. And if you want to continue to tick, that's okay. Now we'll see the answers. This address it says frågor in Danish. So let's look at the answers. So some nice colors here, and we can see that you're not in consensus what this is about. Half of you thinks it's adaptation of teaching and learning to students' learning needs, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All of the options are represented. So that's nice. So if we have the time, I don't know, if we have the time, we can do this again in the end of the lesson. see what happens. But now you have been thinking about it, and now we will talk about it. So we go back to the PowerPoint. So here's what a typical Swedish mathematics lesson would look like. There's some kind of lecture from the teacher in the beginning, and afterwards or during they will ask students some questions, and they can answer if they put their hands up. And then they will do some seat work, working with their textbooks or in pair or whatever. And then there will be a new lesson coming next day or something. They continue with the same stuff, or they will have some new content. Is it something like in Denmark as well? Something like it? For example, it could be they have a 10-minute lecture about multiplication of two-digit numbers. You can put an example on the whiteboard, and students may help solving it. And they could practice in the textbook on such tasks. So, how is this different from formative assessment? What is formative assessment in relation to this? We will start with a thought experiment. And that would be, I'm the teacher, and you're the students. And it actually came from, the thought experiment is, I have a parallel class. When I worked as a teacher, I was very happy when I could have parallel classes, because then I could prepare my lessons for 7A, and I could do the same for 7B, and I would, yeah, you know, the time limits. That was really nice. So let's say that you're 7A, you're 7B, and I, Monday morning, come to my school, and I will have you 7B. And as you can see, I'm a very competent teacher. So I have a very good lecture in the beginning, and you're very good students. So you understood everything, and you practice all the tasks, and you solve all the tasks, and you're very happy, and you learned a lot. And after the lesson, you leave the room, and you say, thank you, Torulf, for this great lesson. I learned so a lot, and I'm very happy with this day. And then, an hour later, I come to 7B, and that's you. And you see the same competent super teacher here. So I have a very good lecture in the beginning. And then you work with the tasks. But there's a difference here. And you know the difference? You're not as good as they are. So you don't understand what I'm saying. You don't understand the mathematics. You can't do the practice tasks. So you leave the room, haven't learned anything. And you're really angry at me and sort of kicks me in the ass and go out. Now comes the million-dollar question. On Wednesday, I will have you again and you again afterwards. Should I do the same in my teaching to both groups? Should I have the same? Should I do the same?
No.
Anyone who thinks I should do the same up? Normally not many raises their hands here. Why? Why can't I do the same? Probably, most teachers say, and I say, we think that high quality classroom practice or teaching is based if I build it on the student's current understanding. So you who understood everything, we go on, because I know you understood this, so why not take the next step, building on your understanding. But you who didn't understand this, it wouldn't be very efficient to go on, to learn something more that sort of builds on what you didn't know, didn't understand. So it wouldn't be efficient teaching. Most teachers would say so, and I agree. So we think that good teaching builds on what the students already know. That's one thing. And the other thing is that most of us have experienced that students do not always learn what we have told them. It happens that we have had a lecture or they have practiced some tasks, but they didn't understand everything. So we cannot know what they have learned just because we we've had a lecture or because they worked in the textbooks. So we want to build on their knowledge, but we don't know what knowledge they have just because we have had some lecture or something. So there we have a problem. To be able to build on what they already know, we need to find out what their current knowledge is. So that's what we're saying. And if we agree with these two statements, then we want to do formative assessment. Because this is what formative assessment is about. We want to adapt our teaching and their learning to their learning needs. So that means that we need to recurrently, over and over again, during and between lessons, gather and analyze information about all students' knowledge and skills in relation to the learning goals. And that would be the same as saying we would want to know their learning needs, because that's the gap between what they know now and what we want them to learn. So we want to know these needs. Where are they now? So we need to find that out, and then adapt teaching and learning to these identified learning needs. And that's what formative assessment is about. So that means that many of us, because as you said, I can't do the same in both classes because I have to build on their current knowledge. But that ain't easy, because many times, as you said, I don't know in the middle of the lesson or in the end of the lesson what their current knowledge is. So what we actually do is we do the same for both classes the next lesson, because we have no other choices, because we haven't found out what the difference is in learning needs. Now, this never happened in a class. You know everything and you know nothing. In one class, it's a thought experiment. In one class, you will have a number of students who have understood much, and some of them a bit less, and some not at all. So that means that in practice, we need to find information about every student and their learning needs and adapt to all of our students in one class, because they have different learning needs. Then, of course, this is difficult. But luckily, we have some techniques and some ideas who can make this a little less difficult. So, the specific meaning of the concept may differ between researchers. Every researcher doesn't mean the same with formative assessment. But this idea, the main idea we'll be talking about, we are in agreement about. About teachers, even more we are not in agreement, or teachers are not in agreement. Mostly because in Sweden, for example, there have been calls from principals and schools and politicians like, you should do more formative assessment because researchers have said that it's efficient for learning. So then teachers will have sort of, yeah, here you have 2 hours of, or 1 hour, as here. Here you have 1 hour of professional development in formative assessment, now do it. And most of us who's into formative assessment knows that we need 100% off from our teaching loads for weeks to do this good. And that also means that many teachers they can read something from the Swedish National Agency of Education. They can read 3 or 4 pages and they say, aha, this is what formative assessment is. And it's very advanced. So they haven't had much chance to go into deep what it actually is. And that's why in many cases they have different opinions about what it is. So it is a classroom practice that through assessment identifies students' learning needs and adapts to these learning needs. I write teaching and learning because a teacher can do this. We can assess students and then adapt my teaching, but I can also train my students to assess themselves so they can adapt their learning. That would also be formative assessment. So the assessment forms teaching or learning, requires both assessment and actions taken based on the assessment. No use only assessing them and say, okay, I see you understand, you don't. Fine, let's go on. waste of time. You need to take the actions. And formative assessment should not be confused with summative assessment. Summative assessment being I'm assessing to be able to say something about their grade, so they can, for example, come into university or stuff. Totally different things. Assessment to be for normally in the end of a unit or something to be able to give them a grade. Formative assessment is all about teaching and learning, a practice, so the students can learn more. Big difference. So in some cases, this word assessment is a problem because some people think that, oh, assessment, that is something when I judge the students, tell them how awfully bad they are, or it's for grading so everybody gets nervous. But this has nothing to do with it. This is something we do in every lesson. Because, of course, if you want to adapt your teaching to their learning needs, you can do that once a year. And that wouldn't be very efficient. So the more often you can do this, the more efficient teaching. So this is why we do this recurrently and often. So it's a strategy for teaching and learning. It's planned activities. I have prepared some assessment questions, for example, in the end or in the middle of the lesson. I have prepared them before the lesson because I know what they want. I want them to learn this lesson. So I have planned questions to find out. But it could also be while walking around in my classroom and I hear what they say or I see what they write, and then I see, you understood it in that way. That's also an assessment. So it doesn't have to be, a number of questions and 5 points or something. Assessment is about finding out what they know and don't know. So just walking and listening and talking to them is also assessment. And if I do something about it to adapt my teaching, it's formative assessment. So preferably continuously, or as mathematics, mathematics teachers, that's a hard word, but at least often we need to assess and adapt. So to do or not to do formative assessment, is that the question? Here's another one for you. How many of you do formative assessment? Come on. Yes, I would say every one of you. As I said, think of this. I'm going around here and I'm minding my own business. I had planned sitting in the back and my students work, and then someone says, oh, I don't understand this. And I hadn't planned to go there. I understand this. Could you help me? No, I don't give a shit what you know. I just go on. That's not happening. So we all listen to our students and see what they know and don't know. And then if we need to, we adapt something. So that's not the question. Question is, to what extent, in what quality do we do this? And I'm going to talk about something about quality in formative assessment. And when I will show you some research in a minute, and when we do research about this and we see that formative assessment has an effect on student learning, that is mostly high quality formative assessment, made it to a high extent, compared to, let's say, more traditional teaching where we do what we usually do, all of us. So, examples of what this might mean. But first, some arguments. Actually, I don't think we need any more arguments because you have only said that we should do this. We want to build our teaching on their current knowledge, and we don't know exactly what they know because I've said it. So we need to do it. So we want to do formative assessment. Still, I will just show you some of the research to say that, yes, you're correct. It is a good way of thinking about teaching. So can formative assessment enhance student learning? Yes, there is a lot of research evidence supporting this conclusion. Just for example, this is not individual studies. These are research reviews. And so each of these research reviews have gone through a number of of studies examining effects of formative assessment on student achievement on students of different age and different subjects. For example, mathematics. The first one, and this is different aspects of formative assessment. I will then say that it would be fine if you could do all of this in our classrooms, but each aspect is sufficient for student learning. The first one is teachers adapted instruction based on information from short tests. That's mostly if you, for example, have small tests in the end of each week. You want them to know something this week, and you test them with a number of 4 or 5 questions, whatever you think you need. In the end of the week, has to be short, has to be fast, otherwise you won't do it because you wouldn't have the time. So you correct it, and then next week you adapt your teaching accordingly. Feedback also, I mean, feedback is one way of adapting teaching. If I see that you have understood it in this way, I could either provide feedback of how you could work and you can work with it, or I could change activities. Work with this kind of activity instead. Work with these kind of tasks because this is what you need to do. So feedback, of course, is sufficient for student learning. I will come back to this, and we will see that, yeah, but 1/3 of all studies about the effectiveness of feedback shows that it has a negative effect. So it would have been better if you had shut up and leave them alone. So what that's saying that the type of feedback you give, that's what's important, not that you give feedback. But that's sufficient. Peer assessment, can we teach our students so they do part of our work? Can they assess each other and give each other feedback? Yes, and that's sufficient for student learning. But they haven't gone through a teacher education, so they will not be able to do this efficiently without training. Can we teach them to self-assess and be their own self-regulated learners? See, what are my goals? What do I know at the moment in relation to the goals? How should I proceed? Yes, we can teach them that as well. And when we do, it has amazing effects on students' achievement. So that's another aspect of formative assessment. The first one is an example of when the teacher assesses and adapts. And here is the student themselves assesses and adapts. And this is actually what we would like in the long run, that our students themselves are lifelong learners and take responsibility for their learning. These studies, the first one here is they looked at studies from all of these different kinds of aspects of formative assessment. And this one is our own, in particularly mathematics. And then it's also about all of this. Visible learning, he didn't actually, is he famous here in Denmark? Okay, he's very famous in Sweden. He compared a lot of different approaches to teaching. And if you look at that, you will see that formative assessment is high up in that one as well. You could always say that some of these may not be good, but if you look at the collected evidence, it's quite overwhelming. So what we think seems natural, we can also see in research. So this is what we do. We are 27 researchers about, it depends on what year. Sometimes it comes researchers from other countries and join us, and then they go home and stuff. But something like 27 researchers in researching mathematics, teaching and learning. And we are about, at the moment, 11 researchers working partly or all of the time with research in formative assessment. And the group in formative assessment research, we have this idea that we want to produce research that makes a difference. Research that will be used outside the community, the research community, for educational decisions and support for improved teaching and learning for you as teachers and ourselves as teachers at the university. We want to do the kind of studies that not in 50 years, but soon can be used by others. That means, for example, that We do developmental research. We go out in schools, cooperation with schools and municipalities, and we do combined research and school development. For example, we work with a school or a number of teachers for a couple of years with professional development in formative assessment. How can they develop their practice together with us? And we study the effects or reasons for this happening and not happening and stuff. Because we think that this kind of results are useful for teachers in the school. So we do impact studies. Studies with high ecological validity means that they're not done in laboratory, it's done out in the schools together with teachers. We do other kinds of studies as well that most people do, but we want to focus on that type of studies. I will give you an example of such a study. We had, this was with a project in professional development in school year 4 and 7. And we went out, we had, took in Umeå municipality, we randomly selected half of all year 4 and year 7 teachers, and they could attend the professional development for 20% of their teaching time. They were cut off, and instead once a week, 1 day a week for half a year, they came to us at university and had professional development with us and with themselves and so on. And when we did that, we studied the characteristics of their practice before they came to us, and we investigated the developments they did afterwards and reasons for why they changed and impact of this developed practice on student achievement. So did it have a positive or negative consequence if they changed practice? So these two groups, so the rest that were not randomly selected, they were the control group. We did interviews and classroom observations before, so we could describe their teaching before, so we could see is there a development or not. And then they had the professional development program, and then in the beginning of, this was a spring term, so in the beginning of the next school year, we had questionnaires to teachers about how they viewed formative assessment. We had achievement tests for all students, and we had classrooms observations during the year. They didn't know when we came, because then they would probably say that, okay, Torulf's coming today, I'd better do something. And in the end of the school year, we had more questionnaires, interviews, and achievement tests for students again to see, could we see an effect. Results: did the teachers develop their classrooms practice? Yes, substantially. Did it enhance student achievement? Yes, significantly when we're talking about year 4. So what about, and here's some interesting stuff. What about teachers' motivation? So we asked them after the professional development program, how much of a change would you like to make in your teaching towards a more formative classroom practice? And on a scale from 1 to 5, the average was 4.1. So most teachers after the professional development program were very motivated to try out for the next year. No, that's how much changes. How motivated are you to make these changes? 4.7. So nearly all of them put a 5 on that, are very motivated to make these rather big changes. After 1 year of teaching, okay, what happened then about the motivation? To what extent does it feel important for you to continue with this changed formative classroom? 4.8. So we have, when we talked about, you and I, when we have talked about now, it seems reasonable that we would want to do formative assessment. And these teachers who went through a rather comprehensive professional development program, 9 hours a week for a whole term, they also said, yes, now we know what it is. We still think that it's really important. So is formative assessment an easy solution to the problem of how to help students learn more? Hardly. I mean, these teachers had 1 day a week for a whole spring term. You might do it less, but it's difficult. It's as you say, okay, I have a number of people in my class who will know different things, and I'm supposed to adapt to all of them? Of course, it's difficult. And I said, I can do this. I can train my students doing this. Of course, that's difficult. They won't do it just because I say them, and they won't do it well. So is it possible for us, ordinary mortal teachers, to help our students learn more? Yes. That's the good thing. It's difficult, but it's possible. Right. Just have to have an eye on the clock. So how may we think when we want to develop our formative classroom practice? Are there any support for our thinking? Yes, I will show you one example, and this example of a framework is very popular in Sweden at the moment. There are some stars on the research front in Sweden. John Hattie is one of them. Dylan William is the other. I don't know if you know about this in Denmark, right? So there's kind of superstars on the educational research heaven. And this is quite often used. This is Dylan William and his colleagues' attempt at sort of putting all the research about formative assessment into one framework, one box that we can look at the same time and get the whole idea. And it actually uses, you know, I showed you different aspects of formative assessment because research reviews have shown that different aspects, they are all important. I can do it as a teacher, I can train my students and so on. And they sort of put it into one framework here, saying that what we want here is to find out where the learner is going. What are they supposed to learn? What are they now, when we have had teaching for a while, and how do we use this information to help them reach the goals? That means that we have 5 strategies, key strategies, they think. One is that we need to clarify what the learning goals are. What does it mean to, for example, know mathematics at different levels of your students? We need to think about that. Exactly what does it mean that they have learned something at a certain level? And we can do this, we can help, we need this for ourselves, but we need to let our students know this. And we can't just tell them because they wouldn't understand that. So this strategy is all about how can we clarify this for the students so they know what it means to know mathematics. Next strategy is to how can we collect evidence about the students' learning so we know what their skills and knowledge. How can we do that in a high quality way? Because some kind of questions, for example, the tasks, they will elicit just superficial knowledge. But other kinds of tasks, they will be better tasks because they will give me more information about their thinking. And that will help me in the next step when I will adapt my teaching. So you can do this in different quality. And we will discuss something about it. I will give them examples of different quality. And then we could provide them with feedback or adapt our teaching instructional activities. But also, as I said again, it's not about just giving them feedback. I will want to provide them high quality feedback because that will help them much more than low quality feedback. So we, as a teachers, need to know what is high quality feedback, what is less high quality feedback, if we want to do this efficiently, of course. And then we have this strategy. We want to train our students to help each other, and not help each other in any way, but in a formative assessment way. How can we practice them to help each other to see what the other students know and don't know, their learning needs? And how can we teach them to give them, so they give high quality feedback? And here, as we say, can we teach them to do it themselves? So we say the teachers involved, but the learners are also involved in this. Everything here is efficient, but many attempts at nowadays in research towards formative assessment is, can we combine this in a classroom? Can I do formative assessment and can I also train my students to be part of it? Because we really want that. I'm sure. So this is one way of having sort of a framework. Now we can go into this one. And we don't have a lot of time today, so we'll just take a few, go in some places here and say, what can this be? So I've chosen this one. How can we ask high quality questions? What do they look like? This is what I just said to you. So the design of tasks. There are actually a lot of things that we need to consider when we provide them with tasks. So if we want to gather information about the knowledge and skills to be able to adapt our teaching and learning. Dylan calls them hinge questions, doesn't matter. There could be another task as well, in which we want them to engage in thinking and learning by discussing. That's another type of task. I will talk about the first one. How can we fast in our lessons quickly gather good information about student learning needs? What to think about? Yeah, we need to plan for. There are two things when we design tasks that is good to think about. What do I want to know? Student thinking that is critical for further development of their skills and knowledge. That's what I mostly want. I can ask a lot of things, but the most important is what do they need now so we can take the next step. What's crucial for that? And I want to gather something about common student thinking. I could assess something that one student in a million doesn't understand. That wouldn't be efficient. So what's common and what's critical for their future learning, continuous learning. And then I need to say, when am I going to ask this question? In the middle of the lesson, in the end, or whenever? How are they going to provide the answers so I can understand all students' learning needs? And then I need to adapt. I will concentrate on the first 3 bullet points here. How to ask the question and how to collect the answers. Here's an example. Task 1. Which fraction is the smallest? It was a task from Tim's. And then I could also, if I want to know if they have an idea about small and large fractions, I could also ask which fraction is the biggest. And to us who knows this mathematics, it's the same question, actually. But not for the students. Task 1, 88% gave correct answers. Task 2, only 46%. But this is actually not the most interesting part. Most interesting part is 46%, but the wrong answers. They didn't respond to any wrong answer, but 39% answered 3/4. And we can see that plus that is something like that. So of all the students who answered the first one correctly, some of them answered the second one correctly, and the others answered 3/4. So why? There were some studies following up this to see how did the students think. And one reason is that not all of the students have a full understanding of small and large numbers. And they think that, okay, it depends on what's under the bråkstreck. Same. So a small number should be divided by a large number here. And if you think like that, this will be correct. But here it will not be. Here they would say, then I would have to divide by a small number to get the biggest. So here I will answer 3/4. So we can see that if we want to have good information about their thinking, I cannot have any numbers. I have to think about how to formulate this question. And if I had only asked that one, I would be very satisfied. Oh, everyone understands almost. Let's go on. If I had taken this one, I would have been disappointed and said, okay, I have to teach this again. But if I asked both of them and knew this, I have this information about common student misconceptions. then I could say, okay, 46% know this. 39% have exactly this misconception. I don't have to teach it again. I can just discuss this problem. That, okay, it also matters what's above the språkstreck. So it's much more efficient to know their thinking, to concentrate on their thinking, not to anything to teach it again. It's much better to know the thinking than only that they can or cannot do it. So take another one. Which one of these two tasks would be better to ask students? Because it does matter. 4.72 divided by 2 or 4.12 divided by 2? I would say the second one. Because we know that one common student misconception is that they see decimal numbers as two numbers with a decimal point between them. So they could divide 4 by 2 and 72 by 2. And if they have that misconception, they would provide the correct answer to the first one. Only to the second one, we'll see that you cannot divide 12 by 2 and get 4.6. So only that one, we will know their thinking and what the actual learning needs are. That's the learning need I had. They think that this is two numbers that I can divide. If I know all these kinds of possible thinking, then I can design these tasks that reveal these problems, and I can be more efficient in my learning. It's also important to see, okay, some concepts are more complex than you think. I mean, for example, this one, in which of the following diagrams is 1/4 of the area shaded? If I only show this one, most students will know that, yes, this is 1/4. And I would think, oh, they know this. But then here, then some will say that this is not 1/4, it's 2/8. So, okay, that's another way. If I want them to know, to have a full conception of fractions, then I need to see this kind of task as well. What about this one? This is 1/4. 1 from 1, 2, 3, 4. No, they have to be. This one, it doesn't matter. This is not the same size as that one. So this is not 1/4. And what about this one? Some of the students think that this is not 1/4 because that one is not as big as that one. So some of these concepts are not easy, but to have a full understanding, we need to know what about this. So the better we are at knowing the problems students might have, the better tasks we can make. But here comes the main point. It's better to do a non-advanced task to find out where they are than to do nothing. This is an example of one of the teachers in one of our projects who used to have a more common teaching practice, but decided, okay, now I shall do some more formative assessment. So she decided, okay, the aim of this lesson is that they can do multiplication of two-digit numbers. So the difference from her teaching from before is that she said, okay, then I test this in the end of the lesson. So she tested that, took just not advanced at all in the end of the lesson, and then she realized that half of her students did this wrong. But they all did the same mistake. So in the next lesson, she did this in the end of the lesson. So in the next lesson, she could address this problem, and she could help half her class. And in her previous kind of teaching, she wouldn't have noticed this. She would have gone round the next lesson, helping 2 students who didn't know this. And in the lesson after that, she would have helped some other students. And some students would have been angry because they didn't understand anything. They didn't get the task right, and so on. So if we know what we want them to learn, we can address this by actually finding out. To say something about also what does it mean to learn mathematics. what do we mean to know mathematics? Yes, in most countries nowadays we talk about process standards or competencies. So we need to see that they have different competencies. And then we have to find out how to ask. Let's see the first question. We want to know if they can find the area of a triangle. Most students could do the first one. Much less could do that one. And even less that one. Because they're different competencies. And we want them to have all of these competencies. First one, they would say, okay, I don't need to know much about area of triangles here, because I've learned, okay, only 2 digits, what to do. And I remember something about height times base and divided by 2. Next one is, okay, I don't have the numbers, so I need to know something more about how to calculate area of a triangle. Because now I had to know that this is the measure I want and measure it. And that's another one I want. But this is even more difficult, because if they had learned the base times the height divided by 2, then some of them would say, whoa, there is no height. There is no base. Here is a base. There's no base here. So if they don't have full understanding of what a base is, base could be any side, and you can draw a height perpendicular to the other corner. Then they can't do this. That's another competence than just being able to use the formula. So we need to think about all of these competencies, what's most important that I want them to learn. So then I would say something about the main idea here is that, okay, we were in agreement that to make our teaching efficient, then we need to build it on the students' current knowledge and skills in relation to the learning goals. So we need to find out what it is and then adapt. And we talked about how can we think when we design tasks to get as good information as possible. But if sometimes tasks take a lot of time to make really good, then it's okay to have less advanced tasks as long as they are directed at the learning we had intended. When I ask teachers sometimes and teach students, okay, tell me about a good lesson. The most common answers would be, well, they worked hard, they listened to what I said, everything went according to plan. And of course, that's not what we want to hear. What's the most important thing? That they learn something. So that means that we must go into each lesson and say, what do I want them to have learned? Because only then I can design tasks to see what's their skills and knowledge in relation to what I wanted them to learn. And the last thing I'm going to say is, okay, I will address some of the problems with, okay, the thought experiment was one class there, everyone in that class didn't know anything, but in one class they will know different things. How can we solve that problem? There are several ways of solving this problem, but we would want some kind of all-response system. We do not want that. For example, that if I ask a question, I want to know if they have understood. If one student can raise their hands and answer, the only thing I will know is that student understood or not. But what about the other 29? So we want some response system that so everyone answers. So I can see all of the answers at the same time, and it needs to be quick. So many teachers have started to use, if they want an analog variant, some kind of these small whiteboards that each student could have, and a pen, and a little something to erase stuff. And then I can ask a question, and then they can write something on this one, and they hold it up for me to see at the same time. It's important I do it at the same time, because if someone do it first and then they take it down and someone else puts it up, and it's all a mess. Most teachers find this very efficient and engages students. Because if you raise their hands, most of the other students won't be very engaged. Okay, you can answer, I don't give a shit. But everyone needs to answer, and most students actually think this is fun. So many teachers use this not only to gather information, but students might say, okay, let's do some more. And they can do, instead of in the textbook, they can do another 5 or 6 or 7 problems just because it's fun. And you will have a lot of more information from all students, and a lot of your students who are not the students that usually take place, the silent ones, they will now have an arena as well. And that's what we want. You can also do this digitally if you want, and I have already shown you one, the Google Forms that you yourself did. For example, you could see all the colors in the diagram. You could get all the answers into an Excel format. You can see, I didn't want your names, but you can tell them to fill in the names. Then you can see which one answered what. So you can have it. So what we want is an all-response system, digitally or analogically. Last thing I would say is another that teachers and many students have found very attractive, so popular is, for example, if you take that, take the first one over there. If you want to know, can they solve that one in the end of a lesson? These one are very good in the middle of a lesson, because then you can get your answers immediately in 30 seconds, 15 seconds, then you can go on with your lesson. So very good for in the middle of a lesson. You don't need it in the end of a lesson. Then you can just, if you want to, okay, that's a task. Let's say it lasts 5 minutes. That's a task. Everyone should solve on a piece of paper. And then you go and say, okay, when you're finished, you can go. But this is an exit pass. So you have to pass me in the air. So you give it to me when you go, and I will check it. Not if it's correct. I will check if they have tried. Otherwise, it's not valid. They have to go back. And then you need to do tasks that are easily corrected. And you say, this takes 10 minutes afterwards. Correct, correct, not correct. I can't interpret this. Not correct, correct. And then in some 10 minutes, you will have an idea about what they can do about that. And the experiences here is that students like this. They are very interested in knowing what's the correct answer. And they go out, discuss it in the corridor, and they come back in next lesson. Okay, what's the correct answer? The main thing is here, you can't make this a threatening thing. They need to know this is not going to be a problem for their grades. If you have grades, this is because together we want to help each other. So the last thing I would say, you need to create a classroom climate where failure is good. So this was some of the stuff formative assessment might be about. And as you can see, there are a lot of more things to talk about, a lot of more things to know. But this is some general idea. So there won't be any time for question. But you can grab me after the next lesson or lecture or something if you have anything. Right. Thank you very much.